welcome to today's podcast. We certainly appreciate you joining us. Today we're going to present some material that will cover a considerable amount of years. It's kind of an abbreviated overview of Joseph's life from the year 1816, when the family would leave Norwich, Vermont, to 1830, which is the organization of the church. After this particular podcast that I'll present today concludes, I'll be focusing the following 3 podcasts on the years of 1825 to 1830, an era that I sometimes term as the misunderstood or forgotten years of Joseph's life. Those particular 3 presentations will be very, very detailed and very comprehensive. Look forward to presenting those to you. So, without any further ado, let's follow the footsteps of Joseph. We last left the Smith family in Norwich, Vermont, renting a home from Squire Moredock. It's the circled portion of that home there, which still stands today on the Upper Turnpike Road. The family had just suffered 3 successive years of crop failure, due in part to the issues surrounding the very violent eruption of the volcano on Mount Tambora. The family at this particular time was heavily in debt, and they were, quote, warned out of town. Now, what is warned out of town? This was a widespread method in the United States for established New England communities to pressure or force outsiders to settle elsewhere. It consisted of a notice ordered by the Board of Selectmen of the town and then served by the constable upon any newcomer who might be deemed to be undesirable. And the Smiths at this particular time apparently fell into this category. Well, Joseph Smith Sr. left to go find a home elsewhere. He paid or erased his debt, and then he left with a Mr. Caleb Howard as his guide, headed to New York, where he had heard wheat was being raised in abundance, and where some of his brothers had gone to settle. Unfortunately, after his departure, there were those who claimed that he had defrauded them, that he still owed them money. This was a source of great embarrassment for Lucy and the family, and Lucy was forced to raise $150, which was a lot of money back then, to clear the family name. It was a very difficult time for the fatherless family. However, after a short period of time, Joseph Sr. sent for the family to come to him. He sent Mr. Caleb Howard back to escort the family to the town that he had selected to live in, a little small hamlet called Palmyra. Mr. Howard was a very abusive man. He beat the children on occasion and made poor Joseph, who was still suffering from his leg operation, walk on his injured leg for miles. He spent what money he had been given by Joseph Smith Sr. on liquor and gambling, and attempted at one time to steal the horses in the wagon. Well, he was confronted and caught by Lucy, and she dismissed him immediately. Lucy then finished the 300-mile trek and took the family on to meet Joseph Sr. in the town of Palmyra. However, another somewhat tragic incident occurred or took place just as the family was preparing to leave for Palmyra. It seems that Lydia Gates Mack, who was Lucy's mother, was staying with the family at this time, and it was her desire to go with the family to Palmyra. Unfortunately, as she was preparing to leave, her wagon overturned en route and she was injured. She then was forced to stay in Royalton, Vermont with her son, Daniel Mack. She died 2 years later, never again to see her daughter, Lucy. Well, after joining Father Smith, Joseph Sr., the family lived in the village of Palmyra for 2 years. I've identified 2 different locations in town that they lived, and they would stay there until 1818. During this particular time, 100 acres of land was purchased by Joseph Sr. and 30 acres cleared, and a cabin was built. Much of the responsibility for clearing the land was given to Alvin and Hiram, and according to William, Joseph's younger brother, this was done by fire. So you would burn out the trees and create immediately some income for you through the ash. Ash was being purchased all the time. So with that in mind, they built this cabin, which happened to be, the log cabin, happened to be on the Palmyra side of a border that ran just to the side of the cabin. You had the Manchester, New York side and the Palmyra side. The cabin was on the Palmyra side, and just a block down the street, Alvin and Hiram would eventually build a frame home for the family to move into, a larger frame home, and that was on the Manchester side. In 1982, Dr. Berg was asked to restore the cabin, and you can see the picture of the restored cabin. This marker at one time was there to the side of the cabin. I don't believe it's there any longer. I've not been able to see it for years, but identifies the time or the date of the building, 6/25/82. Well, during the period of 1818 through 1820, there was this great religious revival that was taking place, and it hit full force, the Palmyra area. Many churches were debating the doctrines of men, and there was a lot of pressure brought to bear on the Smith family to belong to some church. However, Joseph Sr. was reluctant to join any organized religion. He'd had 2 prophetic visions or dreams when in New England, preparing his mind and heart for the restoration of the gospel. When here in the Palmyra area, he'll have 5 other prophetic dreams. And so he kept himself aloof or away from organized religion. However, Lucy and many of the children did belong to some of the religions found at the time of this great revival of 1818 through 1820. And young Joseph was searching for his definition of truth. And one evening, while reading from firelight, he came across James 1:5. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, that giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. Well, so on a beautiful spring morning in 1820, the truth was going to be revealed. And so Joseph took his questions that he had to the family's special place. We call it today the Sacred Grove. And truly, if you visit the Sacred Grove, or those of you that haven't, the Sacred Grove is really an outdoor temple. Once you step into it, you know that you're someplace very, very special. And that is where you take to ponder and ask the Lord the desires of your heart, which is exactly what Joseph did. In 1905, President Joseph F. Smith, on his return from dedicating the Joseph Smith Birthplace Memorial in Sharon, Vermont, which we talked about a podcast or 2 back, he stopped in Harmony, Pennsylvania, to see the location of where John the Baptist restored the Aaronic priesthood, and he came up to Palmyra, New York, to view this important historical site. While in the company of a small group of people in the grove, President Smith felt inspired to point out the location where he said the Father and Son appeared to the boy Joseph. Well, later in 1907, the church commissioned a fellow by the name of George Edward Anderson to take pictures of church-related historical sites. And when he came to the Sacred Grove, the photographer, that would be Brother Anderson, was able to have a person who was with President Smith 2 years previous show him the location of this sacred spot, and a picture was taken. The picture is on my left, shows a little man at the bottom of the picture, and then square in the middle you see a barn. I've blown both of them up on the right. It appears that the location of the sacred spot or the family's special place was perhaps to the front of the grove. And in the distance again you see the Smith family barn. There are still standing a few witness trees that witness the love our Father in heaven has for his children. Boy, if only they could talk, huh? That particular tree I have identified here was 38 years old at the time of the first vision in 1820. There used to be USDA markers on the witness trees that would indicate that they were there at the time of the first vision. This particular tree today is 243 years old, and you'd have to know where that tree is to find it, because the USDA markers have all been removed, because people have a tendency to go to those trees and want to carve their initials or names in them. On September 21st, 1823, Joseph was again visited by heavenly messengers. In this particular loft in the cabin, Joseph, who was 17 years old at this time, was visited 3 times by the angel Moroni, and again a 4th time the following day while in the fields working. He was given detailed instructions and insight. He was shown the location of where the Book of Mormon was hid in the hill Cumorah. Now, the hill Cumorah is a drumlin, or a glacial-formed, cigar-shaped hill. The hill was wooded at the time of the prophet. The top was covered with beech, maple, bass, and whitewoods. However, the northern end was somewhat bare of trees. And we have pictures of individuals that are huddled together on the side of this hill, indicating the location of where the plates were taken. And that would be on the west side, halfway up the hill, and on that northern end. Today, at the top of the hill, the angel Moroni stands as a testament to the restoration of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, while Joseph awaited his opportunity to take possession of the plates, Lucy, his mother, bore the last of her 9 living children, a daughter that she would name after herself, Lucy. The family was now prepared to move into the large frame home just a block down the street that was built by Alvin and Hiram, but unfortunately, Alvin would not be making the trip. Alvin died November 19, 1823, from a misdiagnosed stomach ailment and was administered the wrong medication. I want to read to you for just a second a portion of chapter 19 from the history of Joseph Smith by his mother, Lucy Mack Smith. And I quote, "On the 15th of November, 1823, about 10 o'clock in the morning, Alvin was taken very sick with bilious colic. That's gallstones. He came to the house in much distress and requested Father go immediately for a physician. He accordingly went, obtaining one by the name of Greenwood, who, on arriving, immediately administered to the patient a heavy dose of calomel. Now, calomel is mercury chloride. It's a dense white substance that is used to induce vomiting. This dose, however, lodged in his stomach, and all the medications afterwards, freely administered by 4 very skillful physicians, could not remove it. He, meaning Alvin, told them that it was still lodged in his stomach in the same place, and he felt it was going to take his life. On coming to this conclusion, he called Hiram by his bed. Hiram was 23 years old, and he said to Hiram, 'I must die. Now I want to say a few things which I wish to have you remember. I have done all I could to make our dear parents comfortable. I want you to go on and finish the house and take care of them in their old age, and do not any more let them work hard, as they are now in old age.' He then called Sophronia, aged 20, to his bed. And he said to her, 'Sophronia, you must be a good girl and do all you can for father and mother. Never forsake them, for they have worked hard, and they are now getting old. Be kind to them and remember what they have done for us.' In the latter part of the 4th night, he called all of the children to his bed: Samuel, age 14, William, 12, Catherine, 10, Don Carlos, 7, and exhorted them all separately in the same manner. But when he came to Joseph, who was 17 years old, he said, 'I am now going to die. The distress which I suffer and the feelings that I have tell me my time is very short. I want you to be a good boy and do everything that lies in your power to obtain the record. Be faithful in receiving instruction and in keeping every commandment that is given you. Your brother Alvin must leave you, but remember the example which he has set for you.' He then asked me," and he's talking to his mother, Lucy, "to take up my daughter, Lucy, and bring her to him. She was 2 years old at the time. He was always very fond of her and was in the habit of taking her up and caressing her, which naturally formed a very strong attachment on her part for him. We took her to him, and when she got within reach of him, she sprang from my arms and caught him around the neck and kissed him over and over again. "Lucy," he said, "you must be the best girl in the world and take care of Mother. You can't have your Alvin any more. Alvin is going away. He must leave little Lucy." We took hold of her to take her away, but she clung to his neck with such a strong grasp that it was with some difficulty that we succeeded in disengaging her hands. As I turned to walk away with my child, I heard him say, "Father, Mother, brothers and sisters, farewell. I can now breathe out my life as calmly as a clock." Saying this, he immediately closed his eyes in death. Alvin was 24 years, dying November 19th, 1823. Later, while in vision in the Kirtland Temple, Joseph saw Alvin in the celestial kingdom with the Father. And of Alvin, Joseph said, "A no more nobler man can be found than my brother Alvin." Well, over time, there were 9 different families that lived in the frame home built by Alvin. After the church purchased the house and it was renovated and stripped down, original timber was found and uncovered and can now be seen throughout the home. Okay, now from this point on, I'm going to have 3 additional podcasts that will cover this material. This will continue with a brief overview through the organization of the church, but we pick up right now about 1825, which again is where we'll pick up with three podcasts that'll cover 5 years. With persecution swirling around Joseph, and the family in need of funds, Joseph and his father took employment with an acquaintance, a Mr. Josiah Stowell from Colesville, New York. Mr. Stowell and a friend down the street from him, a Mr. Joseph Knight, were both in Palmyra seeking provisions when they learned about Joseph's heavenly encounters. Interested in what Joseph did, Mr. Stowell hired Joseph and his father to look for lost Spanish treasure in the Appalachian Mountains above Harmony, Pennsylvania. Joseph and his father each would be paid $14 a month. Now, while working in this area, Joseph stayed at the Hale family, with the Hale family in Harmony, Pennsylvania. And here is where Joseph would meet Emma Hale. Joseph was blessed to find his treasure. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And although Joseph's employment with Josiah Stowell lasted only 1 month, he picked up the derogatory title of digger. Many false and vicious lies were spread and perpetuated about Joseph at this time. This particular sign that is here on this slide was put up by the state of New York down in the Colesville, which is Afton, New York today, Afton, New York area. The sign professed that Joseph found some plates down in the Afton area for the Mormon Bible. Well, this sign is 160 miles from the Hill Cumorah. It's one of the numerous signs that make it very, very confusing to try and follow the life of the prophet. Well, this is a difficult time for the Smith family as well. In the fall of 1826, they were defrauded out of the deed to their home. They were allowed to stay, but the home was no longer theirs. Joseph and Emma were married on January 18th, 1827, in Afton, New York, which then was called Bainbridge. Isaac Hale was very much opposed to the marriage of his daughter to this renegade, Joe Smith. This did not stop Joseph and Emma, however. They eloped to Afton and had their marriage ceremony performed by Squire Tarbell. And this particular sign commemorates the location of Squire Tarbell's home. But again, looking at this sign, who is Emily? Well, after their marriage, Joseph and Emma, because of Emma's parents being so much objecting to this marriage, they went back to Manchester up near Palmyra to live. By the way, this particular sign has since been removed and corrected to read Emma Hale. Well, during the summer of 1827, while living in Manchester, Joseph took employment to work in the fields of a family friend, a fellow named Martin Harris. Mr. Harris learned of Joseph's spiritual experiences and was eager to assist in whatever way he could to help Joseph. In the early morning hours of September 22nd, 1827, Joseph and Emma quietly stole away to the hill Palmyra. The time had arrived for Joseph to receive the plates. Over the months that followed, the plates would be secured and hid from unwanting eyes. The plates were 6 inches wide, 8 inches tall, and 6 inches thick. 3 rings on the inner binder held them together. Now, if solid gold, they would have weighed about 200 pounds. And the gold, being obviously too soft to retain shape, was alloyed with something, perhaps copper. 8-carat gold plates would have weighed between 75 to 100 pounds. Now, in the winter of 1827, to escape persecution now, here in the Manchester, Palmyra area, Joseph and Emma went to live in Harmony, Pennsylvania. Harmony, Pennsylvania is now called Oakland on a map. They lived in a home built by one of Emma's brothers, whose name was Jesse. And the home was very, very close, actually, to Emma's parents, Isaac and Elizabeth Hale. It seems that Father Hale had now tempered his feelings somewhat towards Joseph. And so soon, Martin Harris is going to join Joseph, and the work of translation will begin in Harmony, Pennsylvania. While living in Harmony, Joseph is going to receive 15 revelations that eventually comprise sections 3 through 13 and 24 through 27 of the Doctrine and Covenants. On June 15th, 1828, tragedy struck the Smith home. Alvin Smith, the first child of Joseph and Emma, died at birth. And about the same time, Martin Harris, who was assisting in the translation, lost the first 116 pages translated from the Book of Lehi. Now, these events were the cause of much anguish for the prophet. He had offended God, and a season of repentance was required. And again, we'll fill in the blanks on all of this as we get into our comprehensive podcast over the next three podcasts, talking in detail about what has taken place. But nearly a year later, in answer to prayer, Oliver Cowdery shows up. He was a friend of Joseph Smith Sr. and a teacher in the Palmyra school district. He had heard of the events surrounding Joseph Smith, and he received testimony of their truthfulness. He came to Joseph to render assistance, and from his hand, nearly all of the translation of the Book of Mormon was penned. Well, as Oliver and Joseph continued the translation, they became concerned about this subject of baptism, which was mentioned numerous times in the Book of Mormon. Retiring to the nearby banks of the Susquehanna River, they knelt in prayer. And while they were thus employed and praying, calling on the Lord, a messenger from heaven descended in a cloud of light. John the Baptist laid his hands on the head of Oliver and Joseph and conferred upon them the Aaronic priesthood. Joseph then baptized Oliver, after which Oliver baptized Joseph. After the baptism, Joseph laid his hands on Oliver's head and ordained him to the Aaronic priesthood. Oliver followed likewise, doing the same to Joseph. So, thus we have the power to baptize, now restored to the earth. And 10 days later, the first convert baptism is going to take place, and that's Samuel Smith. Samuel accompanied Oliver Cowdery down to see Joseph. Samuel became the first missionary of the church and would eventually be instrumental in the conversion of the John Young family, which included Brigham Young, Heber C. Kimball, the Protestant minister John P. Green, and many others, all because of one well-placed Book of Mormon. And we'll tell you that story here in the next podcast or two. Well, John the Baptist told Joseph that in the near future the power of the laying on of hands for the gift of the Holy Ghost would be given them. And this event happened as the prophet and Oliver were fleeing from enemies up in the Colesville area, up in Afton, New York, and returning to their home in Harmony. Somewhere along that stretch of ground, they were ordained to the apostleship by Peter, James, and John. In June of 1829 now, with persecution swelling now down in the Harmony area, the Smiths and Oliver received an invitation to move to the Peter and Mary Whitmer home in Fayette, New York. The invitation came by way of David Whitmer, who was a friend of Oliver Cowdery. Oliver had written to David on occasion telling him what was going on down in Harmony. David wanted to invite his friends out of harm's way. And so after approaching his father about this and asking if they could come and be at the home, his father requested that before he went to retrieve them, that he needed to complete some pressing farm chores. Well, the miracle surrounding the completion of these labors involved 3 unknown strangers who rendered the assistance necessary, enabling David then to travel to Harmony and move his friends back up to Fayette. Joseph returned the plates to the angel Moroni's care, accepted the invitation, and left for Fayette. At the Whitmer cabin, Joseph received 20 revelations, sections 14 through 21 and 28 through 40. The story of Norman the Mormon is kind of an interesting thing, especially for Latter-day Saints. It seems the restoration of the Whitmer home was accomplished with original wood that carbon dated 1830, and most of this wood was acquired from Norman White's barn. Norman, he was a Fayette resident, wanted one day to knock his barn down. He was unsuccessful with a bulldozer, and they realized what he thought was simple siding had an interior wall of logs. And he had heard that the church in the area wanted old logs, and so he donated his barn logs, which interestingly enough dated 1830. In 1996, he joined the church due to this experience and a special witness that he received in the translation room of the Fayette cabin. Norman now became the Mormon. He received the Aaronic priesthood and was satisfied with his personal progress until the church constructed the Palmyra temple. He did not want the temple to be closed to him. He was ordained an elder in the Whitmer cabin and was the first live endowment performed in the Palmyra temple, as well as the first person to be sealed to deceased parents. Norman the Mormon. Well, upon arriving at the Whitmer farm, the angel Moroni restored the plates to Joseph in the garden so he could continue the translation. It seems that Sister Whitmer also had an opportunity to see the golden plates. This extraordinary event took place near the barn. She was a very diligent, uncomplaining woman who suffered quietly at the expense of the many people that she housed. And as a tribute, she was given a visual witness by the angel Moroni of the golden plates to strengthen her. And we'll tell you that complete story, of course, in a podcast in the future. In June of 1829, Oliver, Martin, and David asked if they could be the chosen 3 witnesses to the Book of Mormon. They had been reading in 2 Nephi 27:12, which says, and I quote, 3 witnesses shall behold it. And they knew of Joseph's revelation in March of that same year, when he said, the testimony of 3 of my servants, whom I shall call and ordain, unto whom I will show these things, and they shall go forth with my words that are given through you. In David Whitmer's diary, he states this important fulfillment of Scripture took place about 40 rods east of the cabin. It is interesting to note that Oliver Cowdery was excommunicated in 1838 due to disloyalty. He later rejoined the church. Martin Harris was excommunicated in 1837 due to pride and disloyalty. He later rejoined the church. David Whitmer was excommunicated in 1838 due to derelict of duty. He never did rejoin the church. But despite these individuals' problems, they never denied the things they witnessed on that June day in 1829. Later, in July of 1830, 8 more individuals were permitted to see the plates at the hands of Joseph. They would be Kristen Whitmer, who remained faithful, Jacob Whitmer, who apostatized and never returned, Peter Whitmer Jr., who remained faithful, John Whitmer, who was excommunicated from the church and never returned, Hiram Page, who married a Whitmer daughter, was excommunicated for false revelation and never returned to the church. Joseph Smith Sr. remained faithful, Hiram Smith remained faithful, Samuel H. Smith remained faithful. All 8 remained true, however, to the things they witnessed, never denying the things they were shown, despite their individual challenges. Well, on March 6, 1830, under lock and key, the Book of Mormon was published. Martin Harris mortgaged 240 acres of his farm in Palmyra to raise the cost of $3,000. The firm of E.G. Grannon of Palmyra printed the first 5,000 copies. The first edition of the Book of Mormon sold for $1.25, which back then was about 3 days' wages. Only 500 of the original copies are known yet to be in existence today. With the Book of Mormon printed, Joseph took the legal steps to organize the new religion. On April 6, 1830, at the Whitmer cabin in Fayette, New York, 6 men signed the new religion charter. The 6 were Joseph Smith, Samuel Smith, Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, Hiram Smith, and Peter Whitmer Jr. They all had been baptized earlier, but were rebaptized now in the formal Church of Christ. The first official baptisms of the new church occurred in June of 1830 on the shores of beautiful Seneca Lake, about 5 miles from the Whitmer home in Fayette. Among those baptized at this time, and to the great joy of Joseph, were his father and his mother. Others were Martin Harris and childhood friend Orem Porter Rockwell. On June 9th, 1830, the first conference of the church was held with 27 members. Today, the population of the church exceeds 17 million. Now the Lord poured out upon us the spirit of deep sleep, and the world slumbered. Then, in a time of lost thought and forgotten seasons, a new awakening occurred. Something wonderful was about to happen. Near the humble log cabin where Moroni once stood, stands a majestic temple where God now stands. What greater tribute to the man and his accomplishments than to have it be called holy ground? Truly it can be said that Joseph Smith, the prophet and seer of the Lord, has done more, save Jesus only, for the salvation of men in this world. So this is my message to you. To know him is to love him, and to love him is to follow in his footsteps. I want to thank you for joining me today on this brief overview from 1816 to 1830, and to look forward to our next 3 podcasts that will cover those 5 years from 1825 to 1830. I think you'll find them most interesting and fascinating. Thanks again for joining us today.